Welcome back to the MetaRick podcast, where we talk about emerging technologies like the metaverse, the blockchain, and artificial intelligence. Today, we've got a great guest with us here with Adam Wilson from Polyform Studio. Now, I just came across this post that he did kind of introducing some of his backstory and things he's worked on before starting the studio. And so I'm just going to rattle off a few of the things that you listed here, Adam, because I think that there's a lot of cool stuff in here. So first of all, Adam is an industrial designer originally, and he came into working around when the first iPhone came out. So that means that he got to ship 7 of the first 500 apps that were on the actual App Store, which talk about a cool way to kind of kickstart a career. But then it gets even more interesting because then he moved into contributing UX and UI design for things like Nike Fuel Band, the Disney Magic Band system, the Amazon Fire setup, Grubhub, New York Stock Exchange app, Bloomberg stuff. Moved into working in what was this next year? It was 3 engineers moving up to Vancouver from Silicon Valley. So then you started your own design studio, ended up doing some amazing projects there and then selling that studio. Some of that work was with Lululemon and Uniqlo in the fashion space. Some of it was with early VR with Samsung and on the Gear VR, Google on Daydream. And now you've been nominated for a couple of Emmys and working in AR with Red Bull and with the what was it, the Google Play Award for Best Social Good App and like all these amazing things with Polyform now. And on top of that, you snowboard and do cool stuff outside of all of this. So a long list of really amazing experience that you've gotten to be a part of in your creative career. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what you do with Polyform Studio now, if you could give us some context for the type of work you're doing these days, and then we can get into your backstory of kind of how all this stuff started.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Polyform Studio. So we're a product design studio. We design consumer products mainly. And who we usually work with are early stage startups. So these are folks with an idea they're trying to take to the market for the first time, or they're in market, have a little bit of traction. Now they want to make a category leading second version of their thing. We work all the way from product strategy to design and development, launch, and then optimization. We also work with big brands when they want to roll out something that is out of their wheelhouse, but focused on emerging consumer tech. It'll usually be something where, it's some new technology, whether it's blockchain related, AI, AR, VR, this kind of thing. And they just don't have the internal capabilities for this kind of thing, but need to roll out something that is to the standards of their big, well-known brand. So we're working across all different types of industries and tech stacks, just making what we deem to be cool shit.
Hell yeah. So with the process with the studio now, like how long have you guys been around again?
Yeah, so we were founded like right before COVID. So we're about just over 3 years old now. Yeah.
What a crazy time to get started.
Oh my gosh.
Did you find that there was kind of a lull building period, or did you find a lot of experimentation happening, or what was it like launching a company or a studio kind of right before COVID?
Yeah, I mean, my whole career has been agency side and in the studio world, so it was familiar. And we're lucky that the other at first it was just the 3 of us, and then we brought in a 4th co-founder last year. But the 3 of us have really great networks, have worked with a lot of really great brands and people. So it was easy to find enough work to satiate a very small studio at that time. And the fact that it was COVID, didn't really dampen our spirits too much, to be honest. We're up here in Vancouver, and we rarely have a Canadian client. We generally service international and most of the time American startups and big brands. So we're used to doing things remotely. So we kind of just cut out the obligatory fly to your headquarters and shake hands first meeting and just did everything online like we always do.
I love it. Yeah, I've found like a lot of folks that are working with these kind of newer, like I like to think of it as like a creative technologist. Like you're providing creative services, but using these new kind of technologies to deliver the stories and kind of the type of projects you're working on, they tend to be very open to the idea of remote work and remote collaboration, and a little ahead of the curve on the tools to make that possible. When you have a new client come to you, obviously you've been working around this stuff for a long time. Is it mostly just word of mouth and through your network with people kind of coming pretty prepared, or are you guys ever like hunting into RFPs, or like what's a typical kind of new customer look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, like I said, we have a really great network. So we do have a lot of people come to us. I'm pretty heavily involved in a few accelerators. So I try and have my finger on the pulse of what's going on with, hot startups on the move. And then when it comes to the bigger brands, a handful of them come to us. We kind of scout out companies we want to work with too at times, and we'll try and determine if they're in a phase where our services would be valuable to them, and we can make a collaboration happen that's mutually beneficial. And we might pitch them with an idea for something. We see a gap in your product lineup, and there's this new technology that could fill it. Here's some concepts, costs and timelines. Kind of start conversations that way, but we're still fairly small. We're kind of edging towards or just over about 30 people. And for the most part, a lot of the work just comes to us. So we're like super blessed in that way. But it was after a decade of working in the space and making lots of connections and shipping dozens and dozens of products. So we're kind of the reliable in the shadows kind of source for a lot of people to get the job done.
I love it. Yeah, and the thing about working with these kind of smaller to mid-sized agencies is I feel like the deliverables, they tend to like be able to focus on a couple of clients and give you all of your attention and be able to really dive deep with you on kind of solving problems. I think with bigger agencies, they have the resource to deliver on bigger projects, obviously, and they can do a lot more. But if you're trying to run quick experiments and nimble things very quickly, smaller agencies sometimes are a better fit for that, especially when you've got a smaller agency that's experienced with those kind of innovative ideas and has been running a lot of their own experiments. One thing I keep hearing from folks that work with like AR and XR technology is that a lot of times, and same with blockchain and like Web3 stuff, is like a lot of times a brand will come with a solution instead of a problem. Like they'll say like, I want to do a Web3 project, or I want to do an AR project. But sometimes they haven't really thought through what's the problem they're trying to solve for. What are they trying to achieve with that AR or that Web3 project? One, is that something you go through a lot? And then two, when that does happen, how do you find is the best way to deal with that, to kind of take that to a productive place where you can execute on something valuable for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we're very committed to making products, making tools, making useful things that solve a problem. We're not really in like the marketing game or doing things just for buzz or sizzle. I used to be a chef, love food, so I'll always use these food analogies. I say, we make the steaks, not the sizzle, right? So we're steak makers. That being said, lots of big brands especially will see some new technology coming out, whether it's generative AI or blockchain or these things that you listed with AR and XR and things, and they want to be a part of that conversation, and they want to be part of the hype train. And, for brands like that, I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with like getting a quick NFT project out the door at the peak of, Web3 to be a part of the conversation, appear relevant in the movement that's going on. They have the resources to put towards it where it doesn't necessarily need to be like this whole roadmapped thing that supports a whole business. It's just kind of a marketing effort. And that's fine. We'll work with the bigger brands to do stuff like that. We always try and wrangle them into like solving a problem, and is this actually relevant for your customers? We recently had a large, very well-known motorcycle company come to us, and they wanted to do an NFT project, and their average buyer is much older, and we had to kind of talk them out of it because it's like, there's just no reason for it. And it's, at times jumping on these hype trains might actually, work against your brand. So we're not, here to just build whatever. We're definitely trying to partner with these people and make great decisions and make things that are actually valuable and serve some purpose and, fulfill some need. On the startup side, that's an absolute requirement. If somebody comes to us and they have like a crazy idea that we know is bad, we will advise against it. And if they're like super bullish about building this thing that doesn't make sense, we'll generally refer them to maybe a different partner that could help them get it off the ground. And that's mostly because our portfolio of projects is our whole calling card, and to have a whole bunch of failed projects or stuff that never shipped or stuff nobody's ever heard of doesn't really do us any good. And we can only do so many projects a year. So yeah, we're always really, really focused on the utility part of things and making stuff that actually serves a purpose.
Yeah, and it's good to. I feel like it builds trust with customers too when you're able to be like, hey, actually, for your brand and for my experience, I don't know that this will accomplish what you want it to. Like that always builds a lot of trust. I do think it's interesting, and I find a lot of value in your perspective on this though, because a lot of people will puffaw off like, oh, it's just a PR grab. That means it's pointless. And I've actually said that a lot of times, and hearing the way you phrased it, I actually challenge my own belief where it's like, it's okay to go for a PR grab as long as you know what you're doing, as long as that's the goal, where you just want to create some quick buzz, potentially get some conversion on some quick leads. Like is that if that's the goal of the campaign, there's a ton of marketing campaigns that do that. Just know going into it that you're measuring it based on those type of metrics and build the project based on that. Versus if you want to do something more long term, then you're going to use different metrics and like a different strategy for your rollout. So PR grabs are okay as long as they're thoughtful and treated like you're trying to do a quick marketing campaign.
That's right. And that's something that's like one of the first things we dive into with anybody we're beginning conversations with is what is a measurable, successful outcome to this thing. And if it's just eyeballs and buzz, that's okay, cool, we can do that. That's a very different path too than we're going to build this internal product, eventually spin it out as its own company, and it's going to have its whole a team built around it eventually and stuff like that. So understanding where they're coming from and what they're looking for also defines the path that we take to bring the thing to life.
And I think that's something that can be so tricky for creatives. So I know in the creative discovery process, like you're always going to be trying to figure out like, hey, what's the goal? What's the problem we're solving? Let's create concepts and campaigns around that. But as far as measurement goes, sometimes it's challenging, right? Like sometimes a creative idea is just good because it's good. Like you can feel how good it is. You can feel that it resonates. And that's what makes it so tough to invest in creative sometimes. It's not as easy as just a specific ROI based purchase like it might be to buy like seats for Salesforce or something. How do you go about, especially with a new technology that may be unproven as an experiment? Is that an objection that comes up? Is like, what's the ROI on this? And how do you kind of handle that part of the conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question and point of view there. This is where pilots become super important. And we say, okay, you want to move into this new area of technology. It's going to be hard to prove an ROI on it. We're going to take some kind of stabs in the dark on something. We'll make it kind of a short-term, finite pilot that is, probably a true MVP type thing, whether it's a product or a campaign or activation or whatever. We'll roll it out. We'll try and measure X, Y, Z, and we'll see what the numbers come back at. And if the numbers are good in a certain direction, maybe we do another pilot that invests a little bit more heavily in that specific direction. And then maybe after that, we decide, yep, we want to actually do this thing for real, or we want to roll it out nationwide to all of our locations or whatever, right? Then we can actually make it a big thing. But especially for big companies, if they come at us with an idea for like this new, like, you mentioned, we work with a lot of retail brands. And for example, if we want to do a hardware project where we're going to do some type of interactive kiosk or mirror or installation in the stores, you want to do one or two first and like work out all the kinks before you roll it out to 300 stores. And, you know, hardware is hard, so it's good to take it slow as well. So that's our recommendation is that, you know, despite being a very creative lot and, you know, don't well, covered in tattoos, don't really look very conservative. We actually take a very conservative approach to building things, especially when it's for a bigger brand that needs to go to scale right away. And the same with startups, you know, is like getting users involved at a very early stage, testing within the market even before launch, and making sure that we're getting some type of indication that there is going to be a good ROI on these activities early.
And I imagine that's helpful internally as well, right? Like it helps the client for obvious reasons, right? Like they can dip their toe in the water before doing a cannonball, and they can be conservative with their spending and testing these experiments. But internally for you as an agency, right? Like you need to kind of grow as your customer base grows and like invest in these projects over time. So I imagine it also helps you track your own internal costs and how to build your team, and also make sure that you're doubling down on projects that are going to deliver for clients, and not end up with this massive scale project with a bunch of complications that you could have figured out in an earlier pilot,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, with the hardware example, if somebody came to us and said, we want to build this thing, we've never built it before, like it doesn't exist in any of our stores currently, but we want to launch it in 300 stores day one, and it's going to be this new pillar of our customer experience and how people buy from us in brick and mortar stores, we would say no, because it's like that's just a crazy idea, because something will go wrong, and then it will go wrong across a whole country and hundreds of locations, and like there aren't going to be service people in all these cities to go and service the hardware if something needs to be updated or something goes wrong. So it's, you know, there's that old startup saying that's like move fast and break things. I am a big believer in that, but you want to break things when they're small many times so that when it's bigger, there's less breakage and, you know, it's not as severe.
Yeah, I think there's a similar quote on the other side of like measure twice, cut once, or like if you spend
Absolutely.
an hour sharpening an axe, it'll only take you 10 minutes to cut the tree down. But if you use a dull axe, it's going to take you 8 hours to cut the tree down, or something like that. You can tell I don't cut down a lot of trees based on the times I'm throwing out there. Yeah, so the other thing, so we kind of jumped into getting tactical pretty quickly, and I love it because I think the business side of these new technologies is under talked about. Like, how do you talk to a customer about these things? How do you actually sell new technology and new creative services? I think that's a big goal of mine with this podcast. But I want to zoom out a little bit, and let's hear a little bit more about your story. So, started with these apps for the iOS and kind of the original iPhone, moved into UI UX design, and then eventually ended up making your own studio. But maybe you could give us a high level of just, in your own words, kind of that beginning of the career and what brought you into this kind of XR side of things.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, as you mentioned, I started my career in industrial design after a decades-long sprint as a chef. Decided I wanted to get into something more creative and less stressful or hot. So
That's
went back
wild.
to
So you
school.
were a chef before you got into design. That's
Yeah.
amazing. What?
Did the culinary school thing. Got my red seal. You know, went around Europe a little bit. Had my own restaurant here in Canada at one point with a friend, and
What kind of restaurant? That's awesome.
it was like a tapas lounge, and then we actually had like a nightclub in the back that opened on the weekends.
That's so
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, I
yeah.
find every chef that I've met they have this creative juice in them where like I didn't realize until much old like my whole life I went without knowing this that chefs are like kind of artists. Like there's a huge
Mm,
creativity and how you put a dish together and think about the flavor palette and the presentation of it. Like there's a lot of creativity and also operation similar to running a production team to get a kitchen running smoothly. Like I bet a lot of those skills carry over into your creative career.
Absolutely. More than I thought would have, to be fair. Like I thought totally I was taking a total left turn going to something totally different. There was actually so many similarities. Um, and the funny thing about being a chef is that there's like an inverse relationship between how creative you can be and how senior of a chef you are. Because, by the time you get to the point of running a place, you're basically just an accountant. The menu is fairly set. There's a special or two every week that your sous chef will take care of, and that's kind of the carrot you dangle for them to stay with you, and they get some creativity. But it's mostly like ordering foods, making schedules, stuff like this, and that just wasn't appealing to me, and I could only see more of that in my future. So that's kind of what prompted me to go back to school and learn some new trade, some new craft that's a little bit more creative, and the creativity could scale with my career. I could build bigger and crazier projects. So started with the physical stuff, was designing furniture for a time, and then saw kind of everything going on in tech. We have a pretty good tech scene here in Vancouver. Wanted to get involved, kind of talked my way into the marketing department of this studio in town, and eventually made my way onto the UI and UX team. And, this was like, whatever, 2007 or something like that. So this was, we were designing apps in Photoshop. This wasn't, Figma wasn't around yet. There was no Sketch even, there was no guidebook. There was no Apple human interface guide. There was no best practices to any of this stuff. So we were really freestyling it. And it was a cool time. We were early Apple partners, so we got to work with a lot of really innovative, like Web 2 stuff. Nike Fuel Band, you mentioned, first mass market wearable, the Amazon Fire set top box, the first streaming, Apple TV style box. So facing a lot of really interesting challenges with my industrial design background, I was put on a lot of cool hardware projects and started going down the IoT and wearables route at an early time. And that's kind of what prompted starting Momentous Software with a couple buddies of mine had come up from the Valley to start a research and development outsourcing agency. There's actually huge tax incentives in Canada to do research and development here. You end up getting like 80 cents back on every dollar you spend in federal grants. So it's wildly profitable for a studio to do research and development. So we became an R&D arm for Shell and Verizon and Lulu and Uniqlo and all these companies, building all types of, at that time, this is like 2013. So IoT is super hot, wearables, very early days VR, like you mentioned, the Daydream and Samsung Gear VR, a lot of like putting a phone in front of your eyes and looking at 360 photos. And then in 2017, we sold that company to Cognizant, and we were about 120 designers and developers, and then consulted around for a little bit, and then came back together with some of the creative directors from that company to form Polyform, where we do what we've always done, which is just make innovative consumer products using emerging technology and, servicing startups and big brands.
That's first of all so cool. Like I'm geeking out a little bit just listening to the story. It seems like you've had a really fun life so far and experienced a lot of really cool kind of twists and turns. I had this woman Diane Olnick on the show, and she was talking a lot about how she moved from Colombia to Canada, and her certifications for project engineering weren't they didn't work in Canada. She had to get new certifications. So she had to move from project engineering into the financial industry, recertify, go back into project engineering. Then she's like, this XR stuff's cool, so they went to school for XR and moved into this. And that the twists and turns of kind of reinventing yourself and taking on that new challenge, it's just something I find really impressive. I think a lot of people get comfortable and like don't let themselves make that jump. And then even if they do make the jump, it's really hard to kind of start from scratch, be bad at something. It's embarrassing. It feels awkward. So whenever I hear someone like yourself that's like, hey, I was a chef for a while, then I started making furniture, then I love hearing these type of stories. With the first studio, so you built that up and then you sold it and then you started a new studio. So I'm curious about that acquisition process. So when someone buys a tech company, they're buying like the technology product, maybe the talent of the engineers, the customer base, the revenue. When someone buys a creative studio, I imagine part of the incentive is like the creatives who work there are probably the main value of the services and of the studio. But maybe it's just the clients and like the book of business. So for them, did you end up having to like stay there for a few years, or how were you able to kind of start another studio after that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's quite a bit different, the acquisition process of a services company studio compared to a startup, because there's not a lot of IP really, right? It's based on headcount, which is partly why we had so many people when we sold the company. Um, so it's oftentimes it's kind of a staff augmentation thing. If you think about a big company like Cognizant or Accenture or any of these, massive global corporations that provide services, the opportunity to acquire 120 people at once that work well together, have systems and processes in place that could perhaps offer services to your existing customers that you don't have the capabilities to offer yet. That's kind of who buys these types of companies. Is it's like just getting a whole new department of specialists that can do something you can't, and the cost of, if they wanted to set up an office here, you got to find the office. Now you got to send some people to the company from the company to Vancouver, and they got to scout the local scene and try and meet people and try and hire them. You got all these, recruiters. Now you got 100 people that have never worked together with no real process, and probably not much leadership from the original company that's starting this satellite location. So generally, those are the types of folks who are looking to buy a company like this. And then for the actual valuation, it's essentially just a combination of ARR and headcount.
That makes a lot of sense because, like, I'm thinking about the resources needed to build a team of 100 people, and like, not only is there a lot of risk of those people not working together, I think that's a really strong point, but also just the time to find those 100 people, like, and onboard them and get them ramped up and up to speed. Versus if you have an agency that's in flight and in running, now the friction is just, hey, we need to get you into our system, we need to get you into some of our basic corporate policies, but for the most part, we need you to do what you do and just keep running. That makes a lot of sense to me. How different is the studio you do now versus that one? Did you guys take on like a new vision or a new approach, or is it pretty similar to what you were doing before?
Yeah, the main difference I think is the level of engineering that we do in house. At you know the main founders at Momentous were three guys who came from a very strong engineering background. One of the guys has his name on the patent for the PDF file format. These are like OG Silicon Valley guys who have deep network, deep engineering expertise, and as a research and development studio, that was our main selling point. Was we have like a whole bunch of PhDs on staff. We're here to do stuff that's never been done before. Um, and my part in that is, of course, designing the interface and the form factor of those things that have never been done before, which is an exceptional opportunity because you're often breaking new ground and doing things that are beyond just the best practices of established mediums. So we wanted to take that design sensibility. I think a lot of things have changed in the last 10 years. Is kind of the philosophy we took at Polyform, was that things are different now, and the hard stuff to make is way harder, but there's lots of new stuff to make that's not like that hard to make. It's so much more about combining existing technologies to create a new and unique solution than it is about making like the first of something, right? The first of something has kind of been done for the mediums we have available to us. Um, so at Polyform, we wanted to be much more focused on working with earlier stage startups um, and helping guide those people through the process, and to strategically and specifically try and work with startups that are having like a net positive impact on the world, whether it's in some sustainable vertical. So it's either economic, environmental, or social. And that was kind of the main incentive, was that like we've done a really great job building the new widget for the biggest companies on the planet. That's cool. We can continue building new widgets for these guys, or we can take that learning and that process to these underdogs who are trying to do something good and help them, avoid failure, which is generally most startups fail, right? So we're trying to help the good guys avoid failure. And generally, you don't need a bunch of crazy PhD engineers to do that. There's lots of good ideas and good problems to be solved that can be solved with off-the-shelf tech with the right process for bringing it to life.
I think what I find really interesting about that story is that you're still the same guy, right? Like you still got the same general skill set, personality, but you're recognizing that the world around you is changing, and you were a part of helping pioneer that change. So now it's like you've gone through this process of rethinking, how do I take my skills and apply them to this new world that I'm in now, and how is that world different than it was before? I think that's a really thoughtful way to approach building a company, because you're right. Like the first time around, a lot of these processes didn't exist at all, and you're just starting from scratch, and you're just creating what those processes might be, versus now a ton of best practices are already in place, and it's a matter of repurposing them. It's actually one of the big things I always beat the drum on when it comes to metaverse and XR technology, is like the biggest thing people talk down about it is it's just gaming. It's just gaming. And I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, it's just game. It's Unreal Engine. It's Unity. Yeah, we're using gaming engines to build 3D virtual worlds that people can do things in. I don't see anything wrong with that. Now we're just using gaming technology for new things. We're using it for business use cases and how we engage with our customers and how we engage at work. And is that bad? Should work not be more fun, more engaging, more interesting? Like, why not make it like that, right? One thing that it comes to mind as you were talking about no best practices or no like set designs being in place before Figma, all this stuff, is I had a conversation with Mo Husseini from Gensity Labs, and he comes from like the George Lucas Lights and Magic and working in the film world, and he brought up this really interesting analogy for where television started, where when we first had television, there was no template. Like people just did plays on TV, right? And then eventually the talk show like starts to develop a format to it, where you start to have a desk here and then a mask, like a sidekick to help with the host, and then the guest sits on the couch next to the desk, and you've got people with title cards showing you what to say, and like it starts to develop a format over time, and eventually you have a format. Commercials were just a cut pan over to like someone with the product talking about it, right? Like all this stuff took time, and now we see the templated version of it. And now the next generation of that's like YouTube is starting to go through that evolution, and TikTok and all these social channels are going through that same change. So I'm curious if you had any inspiration when you were going through that phase of pioneering new designs. Did you look at film and television or print media, or like where did the inspiration come from to kind of create what you thought would be the right designs for these products?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it is, a lot of times at Polyform, we've got like a big thing printed on the wall over here. We always like to say that we want to be riding the crest of the wave. And it's like a surf analogy. If you look out in the in the water. There'll be one person dropped in on the wave. The wave is pushing them forward, and then there's like 40 people in the water behind them trying to keep up. So for us, it's all about staying on the edge of what's new and being in a pioneering state as much as we can. And the benefit there is we always get to work on the coolest new stuff. And there's actually, like, in a weird way, less to know to be an expert. If you think about going to like a technical bookstore at like a university or something, there'll be 2 full rows of books about website design and development, but there might only be 3 or 4 textbooks around augmented reality design and development. So you read those 4 books and you're like an expert, right? So this is something that keeps us on the edge of what's going on. And when you're in these like uncharted territories, the only thing you can do is look around you at these templates that exist in the world and try and understand the mental models that you can carry from one thing to another. A great example is when I went to school for industrial design, I double majored in graphic design. So, I did like 4 years of typography and 4 years of color theory and layout for like magazines and stuff like this. And you look at a really great layout for a magazine and a really great layout for a website, and they're not so dissimilar, right? So looking at templates of like, a website is just pictures, typography, color, and motion. These are the same tenets of traditional graphic design and animation and stuff like that. So it's about taking the best practices from these other mediums and applying it to what you're doing now until that medium develops its own best practices. And it's like what they did with the plays on TV. They didn't know how to do TV, so they said, this is the best of a play, we're going to just record it. And it's kind of where XR is right now, and like AR and VR and all these things. It's a lot of like 2D windows flying around still, because we know those and we know how to do them right, and over time we'll build new things.
Yeah, and it's something I tell in the story arc for XR all the time. What you just talked about with the old school graphic design and kind of what a print brochure looks like versus a website. It's the same thing, right? Like a Sears catalog from the 70s looks almost the same as an Amazon listing page. Like e-commerce didn't evolve how we share content that much visually, but it did evolve the accessibility where anyone can access it from anywhere now, the ability to take payments from anywhere now, the ability to translate that to different languages and to different groups of people, to track the analytics and the data behind it. There's all these obvious advantages to putting that brochure online. But now the next evolution is like, well, how do we change that brochure now that it's online? Like, can we make it three-dimensional? Can we make it interactive? Can we do different things with how we set up a product page? And I wonder, like one thing that comes to mind is like maybe brick and mortar, like showroom stores or inspiration for that. But as you think about like what a new product page might look like, or a new web page that takes in this idea of three-dimensionality or XR technology, what do you think the best inspiration might be to pull from out of existing things? I'm sure this is something that's top of mind that you guys think about all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say movies, like sci-fi becoming science reality, because it's so outside of our concept of these mediums to consider them as anything but what they are already. So like I use the example all the time of what does it mean to stand inside of a blog article?
I like that.
If I'm right, so if I'm in XR and I'm standing in a blog article, I've walked into somebody's blog. What does that even look like, right? Is it a bunch of floating blocks of text and a bunch of in 2D planes? Like that doesn't make sense, right? Because it'll be harder to read than a website, first of all, but also if I'm in a three-dimensional space, how I am going to consume that information is inevitably going to change. So something as mundane as a blog article saying, what is it when you're standing inside of it, is really hard for most people to conceive. It's hard for me to conceive. I don't have an answer to that question. So to say like, what's a website when you're standing in it, or what's an app when you can walk around it, where you're actually like performing functions, not just, running through the jungle in Fortnite or something, right?
So I think I think you're right. Like it's super hard to do, and that's why there's so few people doing it, right? Like this is still very early on processing what that might be. Things like the Vision Pro and like the ability to get the hardware in people's hands changes things too, right? Because I think there's a few ways to think about the next evolution of a website. One is, what does a 2D website look like? Like, can we make it more three-dimensional or immersive on a screen? Like on a laptop, on a monitor? What can we do from a WebXR standpoint? One thing is to think about, if headsets become more normalized, what can we do with like a VR experience? And if that user face has controllers versus eye tracking and hands, that totally changes what you can do or what you should do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is like AR glasses, something like the X Real. Like it's still just kind of a monitor, but slightly more immersive, and like it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of in between the headset and a monitor on your desk, like you normally would have. And so I think it's really hard because right now we don't have all those things in place. The infrastructure around it isn't standard where we get enough feedback from the market to know what these things look like. It's a lot of Imagineers that are dabbling with this hardware kind of on their own, or just imagining what might it be like. And so I think your reaction to pull from movies or to pull from these worlds of fiction make the most sense. And even seeing the Vision Pro launch, it like felt like Black Mirror, right? Like I think a lot of people had that reaction of like, whoa, I've
Yeah.
seen shots just like this in Black Mirror. And I bet their team pulled some of that. This is a good segue, actually. So the Vision Pro is getting a ton of buzz, obviously, these last couple of weeks. Everyone's been waiting for it for years. What's your reaction coming out of seeing the launch and some of the feedback from this first couple of weeks?
Oh man, I've been waiting for this for so long. Being someone that was there when iPhone was a new thing, seeing uh, the change in society that happened from a behind the scenes perspective, somebody who's like contributing a very small leaf to the tree of change, that was going on. Um, we were developing apps for Google Glass in like 2011 or 2012 or something like that. And already I was like, oh, AR is the future. We were making like AR tickets for the Raptors at that time, where like the mascot would like bust out of the ticket when you viewed it through the Raptors app and stuff. So I've been like a big fan of the whole concept for a long time, and I knew Apple would do what they always do, which is not necessarily create anything new, but take a lot of existing technologies and package them in a premium version of that thing. And that's exactly what they've done, what I expected them to do. What I think most people who have been watching the space expected them to do was come out with a headset that had a whole bunch of familiar parts combined in really interesting and sometimes surprising ways. And of course, using their silicon is just like a powerhouse compared to anything else on the market right now. And the screens, I mean, even from the presentations, I think it's impossible to discern the quality without having one on your head in terms of the visuals. It's just so far ahead of anything I've tried.
Have you tried one, by the way? Have you
I
had a chance
haven't.
to wear
No,
one?
I haven't
Okay.
yet. No,
I
but
haven't either, for what it's worth.
hopefully soon. Yeah,
Yeah, I
been
saw.
waiting to replace my laptop until I can order one.
Yeah, I think I have very similar feelings to what you're describing about it. I think there's two thoughts. One, I saw this YouTuber Thrill Seeker say this. I'll credit him with it, but I loved his perspective, where he's like, everyone's comparing this to a Meta Oculus Quest 3 or even a Quest Pro, and I think that's the wrong comparison. Like, it should be compared more to like a Varjo, and just thinking of it as like a low end Varjo instead of a high end Oculus. And that's probably a more accurate comparison when you think about the chips and the type of hardware they decided to put into it. Like, the cost of building that headset is also high. They're not just attaching a 90% margin to this. Like, they came out with the best at bat swing you could expect Apple to make at a premium headset. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I think I just want to emphasize for listeners. But the second thing is this idea of eye tracking and hand tracking being as good as they're showing it. If I can genuinely have my hand resting at my waist and use that to click things and then my eyes as a cursor, I think one, that's really innovative for making this stuff work. Two, I rewatched the iPhone launch with Steve Jobs talking about releasing the iPhone, and this was also their big differentiator for the iPhone. He talked about the pain of keyboards and how keyboards are fixed, and he compared the Macintosh mouse cursor of like being able to move a mouse around on a screen to the touch screen on a phone. And so this idea of innovating our cursor and how we interact with our device, that's at the core of the Macintosh, that's at the core of the iPhone. Now it's also at the core of their Vision Pro. So I thought that was really amazing that they kept it so in line with their brand and their story. I think that's under talked about. I'm also very skeptical about how well it works. But after seeing Marcus Brownlee's review and a few of the people that have tried it that are very pragmatic people that I trust just based on their content that I follow, that gives me a lot of confidence it probably does work really well. So as a V1 kind of development headset, I couldn't be more excited to try it out. This is kind of a fun brainstorm question. No pressure if you don't have a good answer for it, but I'm sure you've been thinking about it. For the Vision Pro, have you thought of any like new applications or something that you would want to develop for this headset, especially with your background with the iPhone when that first came out? I think it'd be really interesting to get your take on what would be a cool product to start.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about this for years, and we ship maybe a dozen AR applications a year, and maybe 5 or 6 kind of like eighth wall style marketing campaign kind of AR experiences as well. So we build a lot in AR already. You know, there's a few things like you'll know. I mean, anybody who's watched the keynote, has been reading the articles, has probably picked up that they didn't actually show much that was immersive, right? It's still a lot of just 2D floating panels showing us stuff that is already familiar to us. So I think Apple was really smart in saying, we're not going to approach the big questions of are these future interaction models that are going to emerge, that'll become best practices that we don't use now. We'll let the developers figure that out, which was kind of their take with the iPhone too, right? It's like, we'll make a really great operating system and stack that you can build on. And over time, people invented stuff that was, outside of what any one company could have ever invented. And the same will be for the Vision Pro. When I think about what are going to be some of like the killer apps and use cases to start with, for sure it's going to open the door to a whole new media consumption like paradigm shift mentally, beyond just looking at like a 200-inch 8K liquid retina display type monitor in my house to watch a movie on or something like this. An under talked about but actually super powerful and interesting piece was the ability to look at your panorama video or photos as an actual wraparound panorama. Even just that, like imagining like an Instagram of panorama only photos, and it's taking up like a good amount of my field of vision, and I can just go like this, and I'm on a beach. Now I'm in the Arctic. Now I'm like standing on top of a building looking over some crazy thing. The 3D camera as well, that that's kind of how they're branding, how they're recording and displaying that content. That's like, it's impossible through a 2D screen to understand how crazy that is, but I feel like it's going to be quite crazy, and like people are going to want to record more of that kind of content and share it and consume it. I think another huge use case, and this is like pretty mundane, but it's not really, is pay-per-view.
Mm,
Pay-per-view, sports,
yeah,
like
totally.
and it's interesting because all these technologies have come together at the exact right time where like people have been talking about putting a 360 camera in like a courtside seat for a Lakers game for a long time and being able to stream that to a VR headset. A couple things make that impossible. One is 5G didn't exist until very recently. The frame rate just doesn't support the smoothness that you want and something like that. And the quality of the screens in like a Quest 2 or something like that just aren't up to the task of feeling like I'm actually there. Um, the Vision Pro will be able to do that. I'll be able to sit, second row back to some Elton John concert that I missed and can never see again. And I'll pay $100 for that because I know also the sound quality is going to be incredible. So the pay-per-view part of things is going to be huge. I look at this as like mostly like media consumption, and then it'll replace what I do on my laptop. Like I'll use it for work more than I use it for any type of explorative, trippy 3D, VR type stuff.
Yeah, I love your perspective on this. We're so on the same page. So the workplace thing, I think that's the easiest way to think about it, is the Mac on your face. Like I love the way they
Yeah.
describe it. If it's the first iPhone or the first Apple product that you look through instead of at. So workplace optimization, day-to-day workflows. I could totally imagine this feeling like magic and being a
Mm.
game changer for day-to-day workflows. But the pay-per-view thing, that's something I've been talking about for a long time. I might have actually mentioned it on every one of my podcast episodes
Oh
so
yeah.
far, but the Brooklyn Nets are one of the most under talked about experiments of the last 2 years. The Netaverse thing with LiDAR sensors and digital twins of real time capture of what your players are doing on the court. It's under talked about. They did it. They didn't do anything with it on an ongoing basis. That's why it's been kind of forgotten. But I think that changes sports forever because one, you're
Hmm.
giving people a reason to buy a ticket at a premium rate for a one-off game. So like I would spend $100 to go to the NBA championship from my living room. I would for sure do that. Like courtside seats doesn't need to just be courtside. I could watch the game from Nikola Jokic's perspective throughout the game. Like you could
Yeah.
see any angle you want, pause, replay. Like there's so much opportunity there. But then not just for a consumer, but for the actual team and internally for the basketball organizations. Right now they have like Surface Pros and like every camera angle, and they've got to go find the right camera angles, and that's how they review game footage on their competition on
Mm.
themselves to get better. But if you had
Hmm.
like a 2K instant replay feature of every game you've ever played, then all of a sudden you can rewatch everything from any angle you want in real time.
Yeah.
Additionally, with AI and what we're learning with generative AI models, what if you put all of the footage of a competing player into an engine and then created a digital twin that simulates their behaviors so that you could watch game footage of yourself against your competitor in a simulated environment? And if we run this play, what will they do? If we run that play, what will they do? And start to see possible scenarios in that
Oh
3D
yeah.
environment, right? And like put a headset on and experience what it feels like to see them make those movements and be able to better prepare going into that game. And for UFC fights, I think this would be amazingly helpful.
Hmm.
Those micro movements that you just are so difficult to
Yeah.
prepare for without something like that.
And like a more mundane application of exactly what you're talking about is, industrial training, right? Like this is
Yeah.
something Microsoft latched onto really early with the HoloLens. Is this going to be an enterprise thing for training purposes and stuff like that? And the field of vision was just too shitty, and there was a bunch of other problems. But you know, I'm already talking to a real major shoe manufacturer who wants to start using these in some of their like specialized factories because they've only got like 2 or 3 lines to produce what they produce there, and these things need to be running 24/7. So if you need to shut one down to train a bunch of people on how to use it, no way. Well, they do it though; they have to because people need training. So they just end up losing a lot of money. But if you can get something that is like true to life and you're using digital twins of the actual equipment, and you can build in interactions and stuff, and you're kind of stepping into like a metaverse version of the factory that is, a digital twin of the space using nerfs or, Matterport scans or whatever you want. Huge benefits there, right? And it doesn't actually take a lot to produce those kind of simulations. A little bit harder to create a simulation of the guy you're going to fight in the UFC or something, but machines that
Yeah.
just do one thing all day, a lot easier to simulate.
Totally. And like the tactile feedback's less important. It's more about just the motion of knowing where things are supposed to go and what they are, versus in sports, the feeling is huge. And there's companies like Infinidec that have like the omnidirectional treadmills, and they're doing incredible
Yeah,
things with that.
so
But
cool.
with our last few minutes here, I want to pivot the conversation to generative AI. So AI is obviously the
Cool.
talk of the town. It's taken over the conversation for obvious reasons. Like it impacts literally everything that we do in our day to day. Has your team started using AI in the creative process or in any of your projects for clients?
Hell yeah. Yeah. We are, as soon as these tools started coming out, we started building processes around how we're going to use them in house. We're not like sneakily making stuff and presenting it as our own work. We're like
Yeah.
really transparent with our clients. And we also say, you need, if we're building a brand for you, for example, as part of your launch of a new product, we're building a brand for the product. We need to also create like a prompt stack for Chat GPT and how you're going to create blog articles for your new website and other stuff like that using, these generative tools to help you. And I'm a heavy Midjourney user. I use Midjourney every day for sure. And, I'm in like the 20,000 render club on their Discord and stuff. I love Midjourney. And, we rarely use stock photography anymore. It's almost always coming out of Midjourney. And, it's all these generative tools are great. They're really good at remixing what already exists, which means they're great for nostalgia. It's like all of the like Balenciaga Harry Potter or something, right? It's like
I love that.
mashing up
Yeah.
stuff, right? It's great for mashing up stuff. It's not so great for original concept. It's not so great for producing stuff consistently at scale. Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about visual generative stuff.
Hmm.
Chat GPT is pretty good. GPT-4. We've actually, we're like 6 weeks into, every Thursday we have Dungeons and Dragons night at Polyform, and
Oh, nice.
staff come in. Yeah, we'll do like a campaign for 6 weeks, and people come in and rotate out, so it's not a forever commitment. But I'm usually the DM, but this time we got GPT-4 to act as the DM for our game,
Oh, that's
and
so
it's
cool.
done. It's done an incredible job. We'll, the prompt stack to get it started is this huge thing that we had to like, produce. But once all the information about all the characters is in there and our stats and what we have in our equipment pouch and stuff, it does an insane job. And, I think storytelling where um, there's a high degree of flexibility is where it's super valuable now. It's not so good at facts a lot of the time. It's very good at fiction, and it's very good at fiction that doesn't need to be amazing. Like children's books, for example, are great for generative AI.
Do you know
Um,
where it's surprised me on the text GPT side of it? Is I've been teaching myself how to build products with like these low code, no code tools like Bubble or Glide
oh,
and things
great.
like that. Less to become a product developer, more just so I'm better at talking to product developers. If I want to give direction on something I'm trying to achieve, I want to be able to speak
Right.
their language a little better. So what I do is I'll have ChatGPT open in one tab and then Bubble open in another tab, and I'll be like, "Hey, ChatGPT, I want to build this product. Like, how do I build these features in Bubble? Tell me what to click." And then it'll tell me what to click. I'll go do it. I'll go back and forth. Eventually, this will just be an integration that lives on these tools, and I'll be able to code by talking, right? Like, that's where this is probably going to go in a few years.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, I do the clicks in between. Where GPT really impressed me is occasionally, this has happened maybe 3 or 4 times now, I'll run into a wall where I'll be like, "Hey, ChatGPT, that button isn't there. Like, I can't find the button." and GPT has limited memory, right? Like it's like not up to date. So maybe this product has gone through updates, maybe it's changed. So GPT could be wrong about where that button is or if it even exists at all. Every single time something like that's happened, I'll tell ChatGPT, hey, that button's not there. And it'll be like, I'm so sorry, this product might have changed. Look here, there, or there. Here's 3 different options of where it might be or what it might be called instead. Almost every time, it's one of those 3 guesses. Or I'll say, hey, those guesses are wrong. And it'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, here's an alternative that you could do instead. It's able to process the context of what's happening and still coach me through it without having all the information. And that is just mind-boggling to me, that it's not just that this is the difference between ChatGPT and like a keyword search, right? Because a keyword search could go through all the FAQs and support documentation and pull up the same support answers, but it's not going to be able to come up with those guesses of, I don't have the information, but maybe this. And that's where it's a real game changer, I think.
I think this is where GitHub really nailed it with calling their ChatGPT style integration Copilot.
Totally.
Because it really is your Copilot. It's somebody to bounce ideas off of, to ask questions to help you get through something. It's not necessarily going to pilot the plane on its own yet, but that's exactly how it should be used. It's just like pair programming, and that's your buddy, you know. And all of our programmers here, everybody who does any code here, we heavily enforce the use of ChatGPT for help. And
that's awesome.
And that's the first person to ask, and you ask your partner programmer, then manager, etc.
Can I ask you a quick question about Midjourney? So with Midjourney, because it's a Discord plugin, basically, right? Like you're typing in a public Discord channel for this stuff. Do you ever get worried about like, oh, I'm working on a concept for a client and like I don't want this stuff to be seen? Is that ever a blocker to using Midjourney, or do they have an API that you can pull somewhere else?
I don't believe the API is released yet, but I pay for a tier that's premium enough that I can do a private chat.
Oh, I didn't realize they had a private option.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad they solved that problem.
I don't know that they even still do that. I have been using it for like 18 months maybe now, like quite a while. And that was an option at the very start. So I'm not even in the Discord server, actually. It's just a chat within Discord.
That's
with
awesome.
The Midjourney bot. Yeah.
Yeah, because
so
Midjourney
have all
is
my
one
own
of the
conversations.
When it comes to visual assets, it's the one that I find works the best. But to be honest, I haven't dove all the way down the rabbit hole. I've basically just played around in their public chat. It does certain things well, and certain things it struggles with, like fonts and text and stuff, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I'm finding that it's incredibly helpful to visualize concepts. Like you don't necessarily need to be a designer and a master at visualizing things to be able to get ideas across. So in the creative process of that back and forth with a client and brainstorming and trying to figure out the right kind of concept to move forward with, it really cuts down a lot of time and just helps you get ideas in front of each other faster.
Yeah, it's an idea machine, and yeah, we use it for a lot of concepting for sure. It's and you know, like we get a lot of people coming to us in the last 6-9 months. They're like, we want to build this AI such and such a product, you know, and I'm really bullish that like AI is a feature, not a product. You know, it's like ChatGPT is great, but as you just highlighted, you got to copy and paste back and forth with some other thing to make any of the output valuable at all. And it's the same with Midjourney. It's like, it's great to have a picture. Now what do I do with it, right? Look at like what Photoshop is doing with their generative fill and Firefly and stuff like this. And that's the future of all these generative tools. It's the same tools we use now, but with the generative stuff inside of them. So, you know, I love ChatGPT and Midjourney, but sometimes I wonder, like, a year from now, when more people are using the APIs, will we even use those two tools?
Yeah, I think the same thing. Like, it's going to be essentially an AI bot that lives within other tools, I think is going to be where
100%.
it lives the most once these APIs get more built out. Because right now, some
Yeah.
companies are ahead of the curve, but over the next 5 to 10 years, everyone's going to be building them.
Oh yeah.
And I think that they'll also be more accurate because you'll start to have people having their own data in the large language models. So if you have a travel company like Expedia putting all of their travel data through this model, you're going to have more
Yeah.
accurate answers coming from the chatbot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ideas around this, some of which I can't share on the podcast, but I really want to right now, but I'm going to hold back. But I know we're a little over an hour, so I kind of want to give you an opportunity before we wrap up. Where can people find you, learn more about the studio? If there's anything you want to plug for upcoming work, this is the time. Let's share it with everyone.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, if you want to reach out to me, I'm super active on LinkedIn. You can find me, Adam Kyle Wilson. If you search Adam Wilson, there's like 30,000, so it's hard to find me in the pile of Adam Wilsons. But Adam Kyle Wilson, I'm the only one. Polyform.co is the website. We're actually dropping a new website in maybe like 2 weeks where we're going to really highlight a lot of the work that we've done over the last couple of years. I think we've got like 30 case studies or something we're going to drop on day one, and really going to, expose the world to what we've been doing behind the curtain for a long time here. So super, super exciting. And then, those are really the main two places to check us out is the website and then me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. I'll throw both those in the description too, so they're easy for people to find and click through. Adam, this has been awesome. And that's the pod.
Pleasure.